Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. The mysterious package.
I remember the exact moment I noticed the package. It was a chilly evening in Denver, and I had just returned home from work. My apartment was a cozy sanctuary against the cold, and I was looking forward to a quiet night in. As I opened the door and stepped inside, something caught my eye, a small, brown box sitting on the welcome mat. There was no return address, no indication of who had sent it, just my name scrawled on the top in neat handwriting. At first, I hesitated. My instincts told me to be cautious, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the box and carried it inside, my mind racing with possibilities. It could be a package I forgot about, something from an online order. But the lack of any identifying marks made me uneasy. I placed the box on the kitchen counter and studied it for a moment. The tape sealing it was plain, no special markings or logos. I took a deep breath and carefully cut through the tape, opening the flaps slowly. Inside, I found a few items wrapped in plain tissue paper. The first item I pulled out was a worn-out keychain, its edges frayed and its once bright colors now faded. It looked oddly familiar, but I couldn't quite place where I'd seen it before. Next, I found a small photo of a family. They were smiling, standing together in a park, but I didn't recognize them. Their faces seemed strangely familiar, like I might have seen them in passing or on a social media post. Finally, there was a handwritten note, the ink scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic manner. It read, "I know what you love. Keep it safe." My heart raced as I took in the items. The keychain, the photo, the note, everything felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Who would send such a personal collection of items without any context or explanation? I felt a chill creep down my spine. The note's cryptic message only added to the growing sense of unease. I took a closer look at the items, trying to figure out their significance. The keychain had a design that seemed vaguely familiar, but I couldn't remember where I had seen it before. The photo was of a family enjoying a day out, but why would someone send me a picture of strangers? And the note, what did it mean, "I know what you love"? Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to investigate further. I started by asking around, trying to see if anyone I knew had sent the package as a joke or a misplaced gift. But everyone I spoke to seemed genuinely confused and concerned. No one knew anything about the package. As the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if the sender of the package was somehow keeping tabs on me. The items seemed to hold a deeper meaning, and I was left with a growing sense of dread. Who had sent this package, and what did they want from me? I knew one thing for sure. I needed to find out who was behind this unsettling delivery before it was too late. The days following the arrival of the package were filled with a growing sense of unease. I kept finding myself glancing at the items again and again, trying to make sense of them. The keychain was the first thing that struck me as strange. I had a vague memory of owning something similar years ago, but I was certain I had lost it long ago. Seeing it again was like a ghost from my past suddenly appearing. Then there was the photo. It showed a smiling family in a park, but something about their faces seemed oddly familiar. It wasn't until I visited my favorite coffee shop the next morning that it hit me. The photo seemed to include faces I recognized from the baristas and regulars who frequented the place. It was unsettling, like someone had been keeping an eye on me even in the most mundane parts of my life. The note was the final piece of the puzzle that made me question everything. "I know what you love. Keep it safe." It felt like an invasion of my privacy. It wasn't just a random message. It felt personal. It made me think of the little things I enjoyed, like my favorite coffee shop, my routine runs in the park, and the small items I used every day. I tried to shake off the feeling of paranoia. Maybe it was all a coincidence, a twisted prank from someone who knew too much about me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how specific the items and message were. Whoever sent this package had done their homework. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I reached out to my close friends and family. I hoped someone might be playing a prank on me, though it seemed cruel and elaborate for a joke. I called Sarah, my best friend from college, and told her about the package. She was alarmed but swore she had no idea about it. I reached out to my brother, Mike, and my parents, all of whom were equally baffled and concerned. No one had sent the package, and no one had any idea who might have. As the days went by, I found myself becoming more obsessed with the package. I started to see connections between the items and my daily life that I hadn't noticed before. Every time I walked into my coffee shop, I felt like I was being watched. When I went for my evening jogs in the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me, even though no one was there. The more I thought about it, the more I began to fear that the sender was someone who knew me intimately, someone who could track my routines and habits. I felt like I was being stalked, and the fear gnawed at me. I kept replaying the events in my mind, searching for any clue that might reveal the sender's identity. I decided I needed to take action. If the package was meant to send a message, then I had to find out what it was, and who was behind it. The thought of someone invading my privacy so deeply was both terrifying and maddening. I had to get to the bottom of this before the situation spiraled further out of control. Just when I thought the package was a one-time ordeal, things took a turn for the worse. Over the next few days, more unsettling items began arriving. Each new delivery was more disturbing than the last, and they all seemed to contain increasingly personal details about my life. The first new package arrived on my doorstep without any warning, just like the last one. Inside, I found a collection of small, everyday items. A grocery store receipt from a place I frequented, a pair of earrings I'd lost a few months ago, and another note. The note was more ominous this time, reading, "I see you're still enjoying your little routines." My heart raced as I stared at the items. It was clear now that the sender was tracking my every move. It wasn't just coincidence. Someone had been watching me closely, and it made my skin crawl. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I started digging deeper. I contacted the local police, hoping they could provide some assistance. They listened to my story and took the items for evidence but seemed skeptical. Without concrete threats or a clear suspect, they couldn't offer much help at that point. Frustrated but not defeated, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I researched cases of stalking in Denver and stumbled upon a series of disturbing articles. They spoke of a man who had been known for targeting women in the area, someone with a history of stalking and unsettling behavior. The more I read, the more the descriptions matched the feeling I had from the packages. I found a name mentioned in one of the articles, a man who had been a person of interest in several cases but had never been formally charged. His history included a pattern of targeting women who fit certain profiles. The information was chilling. It seemed like this man might have been behind the disturbing items I'd been receiving. Each new delivery made me more aware of my surroundings. I noticed more often that I was being followed or that someone was lurking nearby. I tried to be cautious, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. It was as if this man had invaded my life completely, knowing more about me than I was comfortable with. The realization hit me hard. The packages were not just a prank but a sinister warning. They were a way for the stalker to assert control over me, to let me know that he was always watching. The thought that someone with a known history of such behavior was targeting me specifically was terrifying. It made me feel vulnerable and exposed. With each new item, the sense of dread grew. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't wait for the police to take action or for someone else to help me. I needed to protect myself and find a way to stop this before it escalated further. The more I learned about the man and his past, the more urgent it became to find a solution. I was no longer dealing with a harmless prank. This was a real threat, and I had to find a way to confront it before it was too late. The more I learned about the man behind the packages, the more determined I became to end this nightmare. I couldn't just wait around for him to make the next move. I needed to take control. After hours of sifting through public records and tracking down the last known address associated with him, I found myself standing in front of a dilapidated house on the outskirts of Denver. The house was old and decrepit, with broken windows and an overgrown yard. It looked like a relic from a forgotten era, a stark contrast to the vibrant city I was used to. My heart pounded as I approached, every creak of the floorboards under my feet making me jump. I felt a mix of fear and determination. I knew this was risky, but I had to see it through. With trembling hands, I pushed open the front door. It groaned in protest, revealing a dark, musty interior. The smell was overwhelming: mold, mildew, and something else that I couldn't quite place. I fumbled for my phone, using the flashlight to guide my way through the grimy hallways. The first room I entered was eerily empty, but the next room was something out of a horror movie. The walls were covered in photos of me, taken from various angles, at different times and places. I could see myself in my favorite coffee shop, walking through the park, and even in my own apartment, though the photos were all taken from a distance. There were notes pinned to the wall, detailing my daily routines in meticulous detail. I felt a wave of nausea as I realized just how deeply this man had invaded my life. I turned to leave, but noticed a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. My fear intensified, but I couldn't stop now. I pushed the door open and stepped into the hidden room. Inside, I found a collection of personal items that made my blood run cold. Old letters, more photos, and things that I recognized as my own, things I had thought were lost forever. The room was a shrine to my life, meticulously organized and horrifyingly intimate. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. I spun around to see the man from the articles. His face was gaunt, with wild eyes and a menacing grin. He stepped forward, his intentions clear. The look in his eyes was filled with a twisted obsession, and it was evident that he had been waiting for this moment. "Hello, Amanda," he said, his voice low and dripping with malice. "I've been hoping you'd come here." Before I could react, he lunged at me. I scrambled to defend myself, grabbing a nearby object, a heavy brass candlestick, and swung it at him. He dodged, but I could see the anger and frustration in his eyes. The confrontation quickly turned violent. He was stronger than I anticipated, and the struggle was intense. In the chaos, I fought with everything I had. I had to escape, but he was relentless, pushing me back with every move. My adrenaline surged as I managed to knock him off balance and sprint toward the front door. I could hear his enraged shouts behind me as I ran, barely making it outside. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest neighbor's house and banged on the door, begging for help. The police arrived soon after, but the man had disappeared by then. The house was thoroughly searched, but he was nowhere to be found. The realization that he was still out there, possibly watching and waiting, was almost more terrifying than the encounter itself. I had faced my fear and confronted the source of my torment, but the danger was far from over. The man was still at large, and I knew that I had to stay vigilant to protect myself from his twisted obsession. As I stumbled out of the dilapidated house, my heart raced with terror. I could hear the man's furious shouts fading behind me, but I didn't stop. My only thought was to get as far away from that nightmare as possible. I ran down the overgrown path to the nearest neighbor's house, desperately banging on the door and shouting for help. The kind woman who answered the door didn't hesitate. She called the police immediately, and within minutes, sirens wailed through the night. I could barely stay on my feet, my adrenaline crashing as I tried to explain what had happened. Officers arrived quickly, and I was guided to a safe distance as they entered the house to confront the man. The wait was agonizing. Every second felt like an eternity as I paced and tried to calm my racing thoughts. The reality of what I had just endured was beginning to sink in, and the weight of the fear and shock was almost overwhelming. I watched as the police conducted their search, but the man had already fled. He had managed to evade capture, leaving only a trail of chaos behind. Once the immediate danger had passed, the officers took me to the station for a statement. They assured me they would do everything they could to find him, but the uncertainty of his whereabouts gnawed at me. The idea that he was still out there, possibly watching me, was a chilling thought. As the days went by, I tried to process everything that had happened. The trauma of having someone invade my privacy so thoroughly was deeply unsettling. The once safe feeling of my apartment now felt like a trap, and the routines I used to find comforting now felt tainted. I had to change my locks, install security cameras, and make sure that every precaution was in place to keep myself safe. Despite the efforts to reclaim some sense of normalcy, the impact of that night lingered. I found myself looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound, and struggling to trust the world around me. The fear that someone had been so close to destroying my life in such a horrifying way was a constant presence. The experience left a scar on my sense of security. I had faced my worst fears and survived, but the knowledge that someone had the capability to inflict such terror was a heavy burden. I was learning to live with the reality of what had happened, trying to find peace and stability amidst the remnants of a nightmare that had threatened to consume me. The man was still out there, and the fear of his return was always in the back of my mind. But I was determined to move forward, to rebuild my life, and to regain my sense of control. The escape was just the beginning of a long journey towards healing, and I hoped that someday, the shadows of that night would fade into the past.
The last train of the night.
I was running on fumes as I stumbled out of the office. Another grueling shift had dragged on well past midnight, and all I wanted was to collapse into the comfort of my own bed. I was relieved when I finally clocked out, my thoughts already drifting to the warmth of my apartment. The only thing standing between me and that comfort was the last train home. I headed to the train station, my steps heavy and dragging. As I approached the platform, I saw the platform lights flickering. A wave of panic hit me as I realized I had missed the last train of the night. The station was eerily quiet, save for the occasional hum of a distant light. The usual bustle was replaced by an unsettling silence that seemed to echo through the empty hallways. I slumped onto a hard, metal bench, trying to get comfortable despite the chill in the air. The clock above the ticket counter ticked loudly in the quiet, each second stretching into an eternity. I glanced around, noting how the station's usual energy had been replaced with an oppressive, almost suffocating stillness. The isolation was beginning to get to me. I tried to occupy myself with my phone, scrolling aimlessly through social media and trying to ignore the creeping dread that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. The dim lighting cast long shadows that danced along the walls, adding to the eerie atmosphere. As the hours dragged on, I found myself increasingly aware of the darkness enveloping the station. The noise of my phone clicking felt like a loud intrusion into the quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The loneliness of the station seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute, pressing down on me and making the wait for the first train in the morning seem like an impossible ordeal. I tried to shake off the discomfort, telling myself it was just the exhaustion talking. But the quiet was unsettling, and the shadows seemed to close in around me. I pulled my jacket tighter, trying to ward off the cold and the creeping sense of unease that had settled over me. All I could do was wait, hoping that the first train would come soon and that this strange night would soon be behind me. The hours dragged on, each tick of the clock louder than the last in the quiet of the station. I was starting to drift in and out of a half-sleep when the sound of an engine broke the silence. I glanced up to see a lone car pulling into the dimly lit parking lot. Its headlights cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A man stepped out of the car, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked to be in his 50s, with unkempt hair and a stubbled face that seemed to carry an air of dishevelment. As he walked toward me, his clothing was slightly askew, giving him a haphazard appearance. My heart skipped a beat as he approached. In the stillness of the station, his presence felt almost out of place, like a jarring note in a silent melody. He stopped a few feet from where I was sitting and gave me a curious look. "Long night?" he asked, his voice rough but not unkind. I could hear the weariness in his tone, and something in his eyes made me uneasy, though I couldn't quite place it. "Yeah, I missed the last train," I said, trying to sound casual, though my nerves were frayed. "I'm just waiting for the first one in the morning." He nodded, glancing around the deserted station with a knowing look. "Looks like you're in for a long wait. You know, it's not safe to be out here alone at this hour." I frowned, trying to gauge his intentions. "And you are?" "Name's Tom," he said, extending a hand. "I couldn't help but notice you're stuck. I live nearby and was just heading home. I could give you a ride if you'd like. It's not too far out of my way." The offer was tempting. My exhaustion was catching up with me, and the thought of sitting in a warm car instead of this cold bench was almost irresistible. But something about Tom's demeanor made me hesitate. There was a strange aura around him, a disquieting mix of friendliness and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Are you sure it's not too much trouble?" I asked, my voice betraying my uncertainty. "Not at all," he replied, his smile stretching just a bit too wide. "I don't mind. It's a quiet night, and I don't have anything else to do." The silence of the station seemed to amplify my hesitation. My instincts were telling me to be cautious, but the lure of leaving this empty, oppressive place was strong. After a moment's thought, I reluctantly agreed. "All right," I said, standing up and gathering my things. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." Tom's smile widened, and he gestured toward his car. "No problem at all. Let's get you home." As I followed him to the car, the quiet of the station was replaced by the soft hum of the engine. The night air felt colder, and the sense of foreboding that had been lurking in the back of my mind grew stronger. I tried to shake off the feeling as I got into the passenger seat, but the unease lingered. Tom started the engine, and as we pulled away from the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The city lights outside the window blurred into a dim haze, and I settled into the seat, trying to push away the growing anxiety that accompanied me on this unexpected ride. The engine hummed steadily as Tom and I began our journey away from the station. I tried to shake off the odd feeling and engage in small talk to distract myself. Tom seemed eager to chat, asking about my job and how I ended up stuck at the station so late. I answered his questions, but his probing queries about my personal life made me uneasy. "So, what do you do for a living?" he asked, his eyes glancing over to me in the dim light of the dashboard. "I'm in marketing," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "It's pretty standard stuff. What about you?" "Oh, I've done a bit of everything," he said with a vague smile. "Mostly just trying to keep myself busy these days." His responses were as erratic as his driving. The car swerved slightly as he talked, and I found myself clutching the armrest in an attempt to steady myself. I tried to focus on the conversation, but my anxiety grew with each passing mile. The night outside the car was an endless black expanse. The city lights that had once been familiar were replaced by dark, shadowy roads and trees that seemed to blur into one another. I strained to see any landmarks, but everything looked foreign. The more we drove, the more I realized that we were venturing far from the area I knew. My stomach churned with unease. Tom's conversation took a strange turn. He started discussing topics that seemed oddly specific and unsettling. "You ever think about how people just disappear?" he asked, his tone casual, but with an edge that made my skin crawl. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. "Not really. Why do you ask?" "Oh, just something I've been thinking about," he said, his eyes flicking to me in the rear-view mirror. "People go missing all the time. It's amazing how easily they can vanish." I forced a chuckle, trying to play off my growing discomfort. "I guess. But let's not think about that right now." The car seemed to take turns into ever darker and less familiar roads. The headlights illuminated only a small, narrow path ahead, and the darkness beyond the reach of the beams seemed to swallow everything in its path. I started to notice the erratic nature of Tom's driving more clearly. It was as if he was deliberately avoiding any sort of recognizable route. The uneasy feeling in my chest tightened as the roads grew more isolated. I tried to keep track of our direction, but everything looked the same: trees, shadows, and the occasional dilapidated building that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The city had long since disappeared behind us, and the unease I felt began to morph into full-blown anxiety. "Tom, are we going the right way?" I asked, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. "Of course," he replied, a hint of something unsettling in his voice. "Just taking a shortcut. You know how those city roads can be at night." I nodded, though my instinct was screaming at me to get out. The realization hit me: we were far from the familiar roads, and Tom's behavior was growing increasingly erratic. My grip on the door handle tightened as I tried to steady my nerves. With every mile that passed, my anxiety grew. The strange, dark road stretched out before us, and the comforting familiarity of the city seemed like a distant memory. I tried to keep calm, but the oppressive silence and the strange, unsettling topics Tom continued to bring up made it harder and harder to ignore the growing sense of dread. The car finally slowed to a stop, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I looked out the window, expecting to see a familiar street or at least some sign of civilization, but instead, I was met with the sight of a run-down, abandoned building. The structure loomed in the darkness, its broken windows and dilapidated facade giving off an aura of decay and neglect. Tom, where are we?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Tom's demeanor, which had already been unsettling, shifted to something far more menacing. He turned to me with a twisted smile that sent a chill down my spine. "We're here," he said, his tone cold and deliberate. "I thought you might like to see where I spend my free time." I felt a surge of panic. "What do you mean? This isn't where I live." Tom's eyes glinted with a dark excitement as he turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. "I know. But you see, you're not going to be going home tonight." I tried to open the car door, but it wouldn't budge. My heart pounded as I realized with growing horror that Tom had locked the doors. My breaths came in short, panicked gasps as he walked around to my side and opened the door from the outside. "Come on," he said, his voice now carrying a menacing edge. "Let's take a look inside." I had no choice but to follow him, though every instinct in me screamed to run. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled behind him, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. The building loomed larger as we approached, its darkened entrance like the maw of some monstrous beast. Tom led me inside, and the musty smell of decay hit me immediately. The interior was dark, illuminated only by the weak beam of Tom's flashlight. The walls were covered in grime, and debris littered the floor. It felt like stepping into a different world, one that was both surreal and terrifying. "This place," Tom said, his voice echoing off the walls, "has a lot of history. People used to come here and never leave." The words sent a jolt of fear through me. "What are you talking about? Why did you bring me here?" Tom's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it, only a chilling satisfaction. "I've been watching you, Jake. I know how to find people who are lost, people who are alone. You were perfect." My blood ran cold as the realization dawned on me. Tom wasn't just a random stranger. He was a predator, and I was his prey. My mind raced as I desperately tried to think of a way out. "Listen," I said, trying to sound calm even though my voice was shaking. "You don't have to do this. Just let me go, and we can forget this ever happened." Tom's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "It's too late for that now. This building is where I keep people like you." Fear coursed through me as I looked around, searching for any possible means of escape. The room was sparse, with only a few broken pieces of furniture and the dim light of Tom's flashlight creating ominous shadows. My eyes landed on a window at the far end of the room, but it was too high to reach from where I stood. Tom began to move closer, his steps deliberate and slow. I had to act quickly. I spotted a piece of debris on the floor, a rusty pipe. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, and prepared to defend myself. As Tom advanced, I swung the pipe with all my strength, desperate to buy myself time. The pipe connected with a sickening thud, and Tom staggered back, his expression a mix of surprise and anger. I seized the opportunity and ran toward the window, trying to pry it open with frantic urgency. Adrenaline surged through me as I fought against the rusted hinges. The window creaked open just enough for me to squeeze through. I climbed out, my heart racing, and dropped to the ground outside. I didn't look back as I sprinted away from the building, the sense of terror pushing me forward. I had escaped the immediate danger, but the experience had left me shaken and terrified. I knew that Tom was out there somewhere, and I had to get as far away as possible. I ran through the dark streets, the chilling realization settling in that there were predators out there who preyed on the lost and the vulnerable. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I stumbled away from the abandoned building, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I glanced back, the dark silhouette of the structure receding into the distance, but the fear in my chest made it feel as though it was still looming over me. My heart pounded with adrenaline, every shadow and sound around me amplified in the stillness. I darted through the darkness, not daring to stop. My mind raced with the events that had just transpired, struggling to process the horror of Tom's true nature. I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me, and my instinct to run became a frantic sprint. The derelict streets provided no comfort, only a maze of empty alleyways and crumbling buildings. Suddenly, a burst of light flashed behind me, the beam of Tom's flashlight cutting through the night. I ducked into a narrow alley, the tight space feeling like a small sanctuary against the overwhelming terror. My breaths were sharp and uneven, the weight of what I had just escaped beginning to settle in. I heard Tom's voice calling out, his words distorted by the distance but unmistakably filled with anger. The realization that he was actively pursuing me fueled my desperation. I needed to find a way out, someplace safe where I could regroup and contact the authorities. After what felt like an eternity of running, I finally emerged onto a more populated street, the bright lights of the city seeming almost surreal after the darkness of the chase. I stumbled toward the nearest payphone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. As I waited for the call to connect, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting Tom to appear from the shadows. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos I felt inside. I was kidnapped, I stammered, by a man named Tom. He took me to an abandoned building. I managed to escape, but I think he's still looking for me. The operator took down my information, assuring me that help was on the way. As I hung up, I slumped against the payphone, my body trembling with a mix of relief and residual fear. The city seemed to offer a fragile sense of safety, but the night had shown me just how vulnerable I could be. In the following hours, the police arrived and took my statement. They conducted a search of the area, but Tom was nowhere to be found. The abandoned building was empty, save for its usual decay. The police assured me they would continue to investigate, but their words offered little comfort. As I was finally able to go home, I couldn't shake the lingering dread. The night had shown me the darkness that can hide behind the facade of normalcy. I kept replaying the events over and over in my mind, the terror of Tom's true nature and the harrowing chase etched into my memory. The experience left me with a deep-seated fear that would not easily fade. I knew I had narrowly escaped a nightmare, but the knowledge that danger lurks in unexpected places lingered like a shadow. The city, once a place of routine and safety, now felt like a maze of hidden threats. I tried to move forward, to reclaim a sense of normalcy, but the trauma of that night remained a constant reminder of how quickly the ordinary can turn into something profoundly terrifying. The ordeal had changed me, making me more aware of the hidden dangers that could be lurking just beyond the surface.
The car alarm.
I stumbled out of the club, exhausted but exhilarated after a great night out with friends. The city lights of San Francisco seemed to blur as I made my way to the parking lot, feeling a mix of satisfaction and fatigue. It had been one of those nights where everything just clicked, but as I approached my car, something felt off. The blaring sound of my car alarm cut through the night, startling me and immediately killing my buzz. I rushed over, my heart racing not just from the noise but from a creeping sense of unease. The alarm was going off uncontrollably, its shrill wail echoing through the empty streets. I fumbled with the remote, trying to silence it, but it seemed like it was only getting louder. The desolation of the neighborhood added to the discomfort, amplifying the eerie silence that surrounded me. I looked around, hoping to see someone or something that could explain the disturbance, but the streets were deserted. The only sound now was the relentless blare of my car alarm, and I couldn't shake the growing anxiety that something wasn't right. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it a malfunction, or had someone been messing with my car? Either way, the sense of isolation and the unnerving quiet of the night made the situation even more unsettling. I finally managed to silence the alarm, and the sudden quiet was almost more unsettling than the noise had been. My pulse was still pounding as I started inspecting the car, searching for any signs that someone had tried to break in. I ran my fingers along the edges of the windows, checked the locks, and even looked under the car for anything suspicious. But everything seemed intact. No broken glass, no scratches or dents, nothing to indicate that anyone had messed with it. The whole situation felt off, though, like I was missing something. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. I locked the car, double-checking that the alarm was set before heading back to my apartment. As I walked up the steps to my building, I noticed that my front door was slightly ajar. I froze, my mind racing. I was positive I had locked it before heading out. I always did. Slowly, I pushed the door open and stepped inside, my senses on high alert. The apartment was dark, save for the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds. I did a quick sweep of the place, flipping on lights as I went. Everything seemed to be where I left it, but something felt off. The air felt heavier, almost as if the apartment had been disturbed in some subtle, indefinable way. My eyes scanned the living room, and that's when I noticed it. A picture frame on the coffee table had been knocked over. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly. It was a photo of me and my friends from a trip we took last summer, something I looked at every day. I couldn't remember if it had been knocked over before I left, but the small detail gnawed at me, feeding the growing sense of unease. I continued through the apartment, checking the kitchen, the bathroom, my bedroom. Everything seemed to be in place, but the more I looked, the more I felt like the apartment had been subtly rearranged. A magazine on the counter was slightly askew, a chair in the dining room was pushed back just a bit too far, and there was a strange, almost imperceptible scent in the air, like something faintly metallic. I couldn't pinpoint what was wrong, but the feeling that something was out of place, that someone had been here while I was gone, was overwhelming. As I stood in the middle of my living room, that uneasy feeling gnawed at me, growing stronger with every passing second. I couldn't shake the sense that something was off, like a shadow lurking just out of sight. I decided to take another look around, more carefully this time, hoping to find some explanation for the creeping dread settling in my chest. I walked into the kitchen and noticed that one of the drawers was slightly open, just enough to reveal the silverware inside. I hadn't left it like that, I was sure of it. I reached out and closed it slowly, the soft clink of utensils sending a shiver down my spine. It was such a small detail, something I might have overlooked on any other night, but now it felt like a glaring sign that I wasn't alone. Next, I turned my attention to the pile of mail on the counter. I had dropped it there earlier in the day, intending to sort through it later. Now, the letters were spread out, not the neat stack I remembered leaving. I picked up one of the envelopes, turning it over in my hands. It was nothing important, just a bill, but the fact that it had been moved without my knowledge sent a cold wave of fear through me. I moved through the apartment, checking every corner, every closet, every room, but everything else seemed normal. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry, nothing stolen. It was as if the place had been tiptoed through, just enough to let me know someone had been there, but not enough to leave any real evidence. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that maybe I had left the door slightly ajar in my rush to go out earlier, or that I had absent-mindedly left the drawer open. But deep down, I knew better. The alarm, the door, the drawer, the mail, each thing on its own might have been explainable, but together they formed a pattern, one that pointed to a conclusion I didn't want to accept. My mind raced, imagining all the possibilities. Had someone been in my apartment while I was out? Was it some kind of sick joke, or was there a more sinister reason? The more I thought about it, the more my anxiety grew, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I scrolled through my contacts. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? There was no real proof, nothing that would justify their involvement. Still, the feeling that something was terribly wrong wouldn't let go of me. I sank down onto the couch, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of it all. The silence of the apartment pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong, and I had no idea what to do about it. The days that followed felt like a blur, a haze of sleepless nights and gnawing anxiety. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I was being watched. It started with my car alarm. Every night, without fail, it would blare at random times, jarring me out of whatever fragile sense of calm I'd managed to find. Each time, I'd rush outside to check, but the car would be perfectly fine. No signs of tampering, nothing out of place. It was like the alarm was mocking me, reminding me that my sense of security was a lie. Back in my apartment, the atmosphere had shifted. The place no longer felt like home. It was a trap, a cage I couldn't escape. Every creak, every shadow seemed to hold a threat, and I found myself jumping at the slightest noise. I checked the locks on my doors and windows obsessively, sometimes multiple times in an hour, but it didn't help. That sense of vulnerability was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew better. There was something real behind my fear, something I couldn't quite see but could definitely feel. The worst part was the watching. I could feel eyes on me, whether I was in my apartment, walking to my car, or even sitting at my desk at work. It was an invisible weight pressing down on me, making my skin crawl. I confided in my friends and neighbors, hoping they might have noticed something too. But they all looked at me with a mix of concern and skepticism, offering platitudes that only made me feel more isolated. "You're just stressed, Tyler," they'd say. "It's probably nothing. Maybe you should take a break." A break wouldn't fix this. I was sure of that. Desperate to regain some control, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I installed security cameras around my apartment, spending hours reviewing the footage every night, searching for anything unusual. I changed the locks, opting for a heavy-duty deadbolt, and even considered getting a dog for protection. But no matter what I did, the fear remained. I found myself questioning everything. Was the car alarm really going off, or was it just a figment of my imagination? Were those footsteps I heard in the hallway, or was it just the old building settling? The line between reality and my worst fears blurred, leaving me in a state of constant dread. I couldn't keep living like this, but I didn't know how to make it stop. The fear was consuming me, inch by inch, day by day. And the worst part, I didn't know who, or what, was responsible. All I knew was that I was in danger, and I was completely, utterly alone. I was sitting in the dark, the only light coming from the flickering screen of my laptop as I reviewed the security footage for what felt like the 100th time. I was exhausted, mentally and physically, but I couldn't stop. Something kept pulling me back to those videos, a gnawing feeling that I'd missed something important. The silence in my apartment was oppressive, broken only by the occasional hum of the fridge or the creak of the floorboards. My fingers were trembling slightly as I clicked through the clips, eyes straining to catch any movement. And then I saw it. At first, I thought my tired mind was playing tricks on me, but as I rewound the footage and played it again, my heart dropped into my stomach. There, in the grainy video from the camera pointed at the street, was a shadowy figure. It was barely visible, just a vague shape that seemed to melt into the darkness. But it was there, lingering near my car, just moments before the alarm went off. The figure stood still for a few seconds, almost as if it was waiting for something. And then it moved, quickly, purposefully, towards my apartment. My breath caught in my throat as I watched, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. The figure disappeared from the camera's view, but a few minutes later, another camera caught a brief glimpse of someone slipping into my apartment through the front door. The door that I was sure I had locked before leaving that night. My blood ran cold as I watched the shadowy form disappear into my home, moving with an eerie familiarity, as if they'd done this before. As if they knew exactly where to go. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I had to force myself to keep watching. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the implications of what I was seeing. Someone had been in my apartment. Not just once, but multiple times. They had been watching me, learning my routines, waiting for the right moment to strike. And I had been completely oblivious, chalking up my fears to paranoia, while all along, someone had been invading my home, my sanctuary. The footage revealed more than just a break-in. It exposed the depth of the threat I was facing. This wasn't a random act of vandalism or a careless prank. This was calculated, deliberate. The figure had moved with a chilling confidence, as if they knew they wouldn't be caught. And the worst part, I had no idea who they were or why they were targeting me. The sense of violation was overwhelming, suffocating. My home no longer felt like a safe place. It felt like a trap, a prison where I was being watched and manipulated. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling from the revelation. I had been right all along. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just in my head. But knowing the truth didn't bring any relief. It only made the fear more real, more immediate. Whoever this person was, they had been so close to me, slipping in and out of my life without leaving a trace. They had breached the one place where I was supposed to feel safe, and now, that sense of safety was shattered beyond repair. I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. Not after seeing that footage. I needed to get out, to find somewhere safe, to figure out who was doing this and why. But as I packed a bag and prepared to leave, one thought kept haunting me. No matter where I went, would I ever really be safe again? The night stretched on, heavy with the weight of my newfound knowledge. And as I walked out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been watching me wasn't finished. They had gotten too close, too familiar with my life. And I knew, deep down, that this was far from over.